I learned something interesting this week in preparation for this podcast episode, and that is that as organizations increasingly recognize the limitations of traditional data storage methods, the shift from tape to cloud has not just become a trend, but a necessity. Research I found indicates that nearly 70% of companies still rely on magnetic tape for data storage, despite the fact that this method can lead to inefficiencies and increased costs. The challenge, I'm told, lies in the complexity of migrating vast amounts of legacy data while ensuring data integrity and accessibility. The fact is that many organizations struggle with outdated data management practices that hinder their ability to harness the full potential of their information assets. How do we address this, and how can we maximize revenue growth in the process? I'll be exploring this with the CEO of a pioneering company specializing in tape to cloud migration. But first, hello. Welcome to the Predictable B2B Success podcast brought to you by Sproutword.com. I'm Vinay Koshy, and our guest is Guy Holmes. Guy, you're the founder and CEO of Tape Ark. I believe you have a degree in physics, but have enjoyed a 20-plus year career of founding companies in the tape and data management space, as well as a career in the international oil and gas industry as well. Now, you've built, from what I hear, a reputation across a wide range of industries for overcoming the issues and complexities of liberating legacy data assets to the cloud and advising on the commercial considerations one should review, as well as commenting on the risk of doing nothing and moving too slow. I also believe that you also have a bit of a take on how new discoveries can be found from legacy data using AI and machine language technologies that can add significant value. I'm curious, Guy. I would imagine that you would have had a fair few experiences that led to the inception of what is now Tape Ark. But I wonder if you could perhaps pull out one to paint a bit of a picture for us as to the extent of the problem as you saw it back then and how that led to Tape Ark.
Yeah, 100%. Thanks for having me. So this is my fifth company. The first company was largely involved in managing large volumes of data that resided on tape for the oil sector. And the volumes of data were so large that they wouldn't fit on their conventional server arrays inside their corporate headquarters. So what they would have us do is take those large chunks of data and break them into small pieces that they could analyze one at a time until they figured out which pieces they thought were really interesting. And then they would focus on those pieces. Now, obviously, iterating through something that's sequential like that is way slower than what you can do now in terms of scalability with the cloud. So that was my first taste of why are we doing this way? And it was always a frustration of the oil industry that they never had enough room to store and process and manipulate this data the way they wanted to. So they were always looking for working at small scale, really. Yeah. Big scale industry working at a tiny scale. So there's your first clue that they probably need something a bit better.
And given your journey to date, what would you say is your personal area of strength?
Me personally?
Correct.
I was in the military when I got out of high school at the age of 16 or so. I had to get my parents to sign off that they would let me go into the military because I was too young to join on my own accord. And in there, I worked with a range of awesome people, and I was a combat medic. And I realized that I couldn't work underneath the hierarchy that was there simply because people had been there longer than I had. And I think so super early on, I realized that I was going to work for myself. And the second thing was that an old boss of mine many years ago had a saying, which was bite off more than you can chew and then chew like hell. And I've done that over the last 20 years in building different businesses. And so I think my strength is probably grit, resilience, and then I just happen to be educated in the right things at university. A lot of people who become business owners might do a degree that has nothing to do with what they end up doing as an entrepreneur. So I was lucky that I got the education and also had the drive and the tenacity to make it happen.
Certainly. And in that area of strength, what would you say is something that businesses don't know but should?
Once again, same boss had another saying, and it was, don't prove yourself wrong, prove yourself right. So instead of saying, is this the right way to do it? No, okay, I'll adjust. If you think it's the right way to do it, try and prove that it isn't. And that'll factor out a whole range of issues that you may not have thought of. Just because it's working right doesn't mean A, it is right, or B, that it couldn't be better. So I think he taught me a whole range of tricks, but that's one where we just continually innovate now. It's never good enough. I think that's one of the other strengths that I have is probably identifying something that isn't good enough yet, even though a lot of people would settle on it.
Interesting. How would you say that's led to Tape Ark's evolution, though?
How's that led to the
Yeah.
evolution? First company was taking large volumes of data. We received a volume of data that was on 34,000 tapes. It was one piece of data, but it was so large that it spanned 34,000 individual tapes. The company who received that data couldn't use it all at once
Mhm.
because it was too large. And I found it extremely frustrating that they would spend 10, 12, $15 million on a piece of data, but then had to spend 3 years trying to analyze it. It didn't make any sense to me. And from that point on, I started to think of new ways to deliver content. We worked on the data sets that we had were three-dimensional models. So they had a surface and a depth,
Mhm.
an X, Y, and a Z axis. And so an oil company could be looking at the surface, they could be looking in the middle of the cube, they could be looking in the corner of the cube. And we designed some tools to allow them to hone in on where they wanted to go quite seamlessly through a 3D model. This was very early days of 3D modeling. And I think I just saw the benefits. I saw the glimmer in customers' eyes that we were able to do that. And I realized that there's so many things we could improve on that I just kept pushing the boundaries.
Mm.
And now we've created a company that, with the advent of the cloud, has allowed us to use true scalability, infinite storage repositories, infinite processing capabilities. And now those data sets that were on 34,000 tapes that took 3 years to process, one of the local oil companies here in Australia did a project similar to that in 10 days.
Mm.
That was 3 years down to 10 days. And so that stuff excites me. And I get excited by what people can do with their content more than I do in managing it for them. I love the fact that we enable things to happen that previously were inconceivable.
Certainly. I'd love to unpack that a little bit. So you've painted for us a bit of a picture as to the extent of some of these repositories of data that some companies have because of legacy data management. Transferring it to the cloud seems to make sense, just given the way technology's evolved. Transferring, I believe there is a bit of a process, though, to undertake. And I wonder if you could share, perhaps give us a high level of how that's done.
Sure. Yeah. If we look at our customers, there are two types in the main. There's customers who look at their archive data and know that they can make money out of that data by using it either in their AI models or their machine learning models, or they can license it and resell it to other people. So there's this class of customer that we call the monetize customer, where they look at their data and go, we can make money. There's gold in those hills. Let's go dig for it. Then the other class of customer is a compliance customer. They need to keep the data for in the court system here. If there was a fatality in a particular court case involving a murder or something, they need to keep those records for 100 years.
Mm.
So tape is not a place to put something you need to keep for 100 years. So in those two, let's look at the monetized customer. We did a job where a large medical group was who sells medical equipment, picture CT scanners or X-ray
Mhm.
machines. Every X-ray that was taken digitally was stored in a repository and then backed up to tape every night. And eventually, the collection of chest X-rays from that facility was 180,000 chest X-rays, all of people from a particular geography where there was a high likelihood of a particular type of cancer. Firstly, that's a compliance issue. We need to keep these X-rays for X number of years because the compliance for health records are vary from place to place. But let's just call this one 20 years. But secondly, to have a set of chest X-rays for 180,000 people from one geography where there's a high incidence of a certain type of cancer is an AI or ML dream pool of data to turn that into a new discovery. A lot of customers who think they're compliance customers are actually maybe not monetizers, but absolutely can benefit from the use of getting their data into an addressable place where machine learning can attack it in one hit, and not have to iterate through 4,000 tapes to find that one gem. So We took that data, we ran it through, and we believe that our company will be responsible in even a remote way for helping solve some of the world's most complex issues by bringing the world's history. The whole theory of predictive analytics requires that you have historical content to make your future predictions on, and the world's collection of historical data is sitting on tape. It's not addressable. In addition to that, what we're seeing is that the large pools of data used in AI models are now starting to get put behind paywalls. So companies that were training on certain data sets are now being forced to pay for those data sets. And we're starting to see a shrinkage in the amount of data available to AI engines to maybe learn new things from. And that's where we come in. We think we can backfill that with really extraordinary data sets from every single market that you can think of, from aircraft engines through to patient chest x-rays through to the weather.
Brilliant. I'm assuming that the process of taking data off the tape and to the cloud a little bit complex. Is this like a proprietary bit of technology that you've developed, or existing tools that you use? How does it work?
Yeah, sorry. So we built from day one, I wanted to design firstly a command and control system that would allow us to control a wide array of tape equipment from one location. We knew we were going to be a global company, but I also largely wanted to make the ingest of tapes into the cloud as simple as possible in each of the remote sites and leave the complexity up to one data center team that was headquartered here with us. So we built a tool called ArcBridge. ArcBridge is a tool for receiving. We photograph every tape we receive to preserve all of its label contents so that if we need to reproduce that tape for a court case, we can make a tape that is identical to that tape, including label, handwriting, anything that was on it. And ArcBridge captures these photographs. It reads the RFID chips inside of tapes if there is one. It captures user interface data about the tape, what kind of tape drive would be required to read it, how full it is. And then it controls really simply through the scanning of a couple of barcodes how the tape drives. We use IoT in the cloud to monitor all the tape drives globally. And then when we stick a tape into a drive and scan its barcode, the IoT system kicks off and says, that's a tape for company XYZ. This is the account it needs to go to. This is the drive I'm going to read from. This is the required bandwidth that I need coming out of the facility to make that happen. And we built basically a very big orchestration layer to allow us to scale to, we're moving just on 2 petabytes a day now out of our facilities. So we're pushing, a lot of content out into the cloud.
Brilliant. And I'm assuming there's a little bit of education required to help people understand the benefits of doing this. And perhaps more importantly, the potential of being able to access this data for future applications. I'm curious, how do you go about doing that and highlighting the possibilities that exist with some of the data that resides on tape?
I'll try and keep this short, but when I first started the business, I had just left another company that I had sold, and I was under a management agreement with them to work with them. And we had a very reasonable sized disagreement about what the future of storage technology was going to be. I thought it was the cloud. They didn't believe that. They thought nobody would ever use the cloud for the sort of things that I was talking about. So I agreed I was going to go off and create this company that would liberate the largest collections of data on the planet. And my first 2 years of that was building a bit of software, but mainly educating people. A lot of people said, nobody's doing that. Why would we do that? And the biggest benefit to people building a business like this is that is finding the case examples that you can show to people as to how someone benefited from it. It didn't matter about price, positioning, marketing. It was actually, why would I do this at our young stage? We really needed to convince people about the reason why they wanted to do it. And that was hard work. We spent a couple of years doing that. We did that via talking at conferences. I spoke at a conference every few months. We released a podcast early on in the company to try and educate people about how that worked. We worked with our partners in the main to share education with them, to also to motivate them to help us find these customers because they were a bit skeptical too that this was
Mm.
actually going to be a thing. And once they realized the implications of what we were doing and the scale at which we could do it, they really jumped on board. So finding partners that want to share that story and have tools that will help your story become a reality was a big part of how we got to where we are.
Mhm. Visual aids. I wonder if they've helped you in being able to get your point across, because quite often I've found that it's not just about telling someone, but actually being able to point to a picture or an analogy of the concept that you're trying to share that helps get people wrap their minds around the concept. Could you speak to that?
Yeah, it's funny because when I came up with the idea to do this, I drew a picture on a piece of paper in my study at home. This was before the
Mhm.
company was created. And I got up in the morning and called at the time my CTO and said, "We're going to start a new company and this is what we're going to do." And that graphic that I drew on that piece of paper is the first slide in every slide deck that I use. I've obviously cleaned it up. It looks a little bit more professional now than it did when it was a bit of scrap of paper. But explaining to people the future of storage, the accessibility issues that they have, overcoming some of the, I'm going to call it misinformation about cloud security
Mhm.
versus tape security and a range of other issues. And we've compacted that into our first 5 slides. And then we're over the hurdle of educating them about why and how. And then it's into what's the benefits to them. That one graphic is an XY axis chart with 3 lines on it that intersect at a certain point. And that point in time is the time when it was actually ready for people to do what we're explaining to them. And it makes complete sense when you have a look at it as to why the nexus, which is what we call it, where 3 lines intersect on a graph, where we're comparing the cost to store a tape offsite versus the cost to put it in the cloud versus the accessibility issues. And you start to see, wow, there's some power
Yeah.
once we actually liberate this and a huge amount of cost savings for them. And there's a lot of companies that are maintaining huge racks of equipment in data centers dedicated to tape backups or tape restore, even where they're not backing up to tape anymore, but they maintain their legacy tape equipment just in case they have to get to some data
Mm.
in 3 years' time. And it costs them a huge amount of money compared to doing what we do. Yeah, we've got a number of swim lanes that we're in that are quite compelling almost for any use case of a company who honestly cares about their data.
You've certainly painted a picture where the cloud allows everything to be done at scale. But I believe you're also of the mindset that as entrepreneurs, we need to be thinking bigger every time they look at perhaps a kink in the path or a bottleneck, if you will. Could you share an example in your journey, especially with Tape Ark, that highlights to you the scalable mindset?
Yeah, 100%. Like we have the scalable mindset runs right across the company. Starts with our developers and myself in that anything that can be done in a week, we think can be done in a minute. And we're always trying to refine things down to that. So one really good example of a customer that has taken advantage of the scale and then the benefits that are derived from it would be a work we did for a public transport authority here in Australia. And on all of their buses, trains, train stations, they have CCTV cameras positioned in them to record what's happening on the bus and so forth. And they were spending a lot of money storing all that on tape. Whenever they needed to review an incident, they would have to go get the tape back and rewind it and find the object that they were looking for. Um, and now they've flipped that on its head, and the video is being used as real time accident prediction. So instead of analyzing
Hmm.
an incident that had already occurred, they're now predicting when an incident is likely to occur and then trying to prevent it. And that's a huge leap from we have to maintain our video for 7 years. And geez, if somebody trips on the train tracks, we really need to know whether they were okay or not, to real time analytics, including when buses pass each other. Are they on schedule? Which one's fuller? Is the bus weighted more to the left because there's more people sitting on the left side? Is that going to change the wear in the tires? There's just so much you can get out of your data that people are missing out on,
Mm.
that it's crazy. They're a great example just because they are able to go completely from one end of the spectrum to the other, from, you know, analyzing historical events to predicting future ones. And that's about as good as you could ever really expect from your data, is knowing
Mm.
something that might happen in the future.
I'd be curious, would you say that you need to recategorize what big means in the context of your work?
Oh, look, 100%. We're moving 2 petabytes a day into the public
Mhm.
cloud. Now, a petabyte is a lot of data for most people. Two is a lot. Historically, a company with 2 petabytes would have taken several years to make that migration to the cloud, and we're now doing that every day. We did a job for a large broadcaster where we moved 20 petabytes of video, and then we wrote a routine to split those videos into individual TV shows. So just picture like a one continuous stream of The Simpsons with 15 episodes in one video. We then wrote some technology to split those into the 15 separate uh, episodes, rename the episodes, identify whether there was any product placement in those episodes. Was there a Coke can or a bottle of beer or what have you? Were there any caricatures on there of TV stars like Tom Cruise or someone that was inside one of those videos? And over a weekend, we processed 20 petabytes and created an extremely rich data set that they could monetize instantly,
Mm.
as opposed to waiting for months or even years to get to the point where they understood what was in their data. And by using the scale of the cloud and running millions of processes simultaneously on the data as opposed to one at a time like you do in conventional computing on the ground, they were able to derive a completely new data set, which is now streaming to people's houses and making them money.
Brilliant. I came across an article, I think this was back in 2022, where Microsoft picked you to help the Met Office in the UK move something like 220 petabytes of data to the cloud. Obviously, it certainly helps to have a partner like Microsoft assist you with some of the projects that you're working on. But you talked about partnerships a little bit before, and I'm curious. You also mentioned in our earlier conversation the idea of hyperscale partnerships. So, uh, one would love to get your definition on hyperscale partnerships and then how you're finding that these work well to drive revenue growth for Tape Ark.
Yeah, 100%. For us, there's a term called hyperscaler cloud providers, and those are the Microsoft and the Amazon Web Services and the Googles, to a lesser extent, Backblaze and Wasabi, the two kind of slightly different positioned clouds. So our hyperscaler friends are Microsoft, AWS, and Google. And they're hyperscale because they're growing at unprecedented rates. They're hyperscale because they provide almost unlimited resources to anybody who wants to tap into them. If you want to process a giant piece of data in 1 hour, you can fire up 2 million nodes and run them and then turn them off,
Mm.
pay for what you use, and move on. So we found that, and this is advice for anybody who's in B2B, that the other term I use is tailwinds. So when you looked back 5 years ago at the predictions of how the cloud was going to grow, and you saw that it was going to be 100% plus growth, and that those hyperscalers are going to provide a set of core services, there's going to be a lot of low hanging fruit where they're not going to be great at solving niche problems. They're really going to be about how to make it a commodity. So we rode the tailwinds of those clouds. We looked at them and knew they were going to grow. We wanted to grow off their back. And we positioned ourselves as a partner to them. And now we're certified partners and have gone through all the certification processes, but flew on their magic carpet basically at the back and picked up a relatively small part of an industry that they were unlikely to service because of the complexity of what we do and the boutique nature of it. And now what we're seeing is that our business is growing at rates right alongside theirs. I encourage any probably young entrepreneur to have a look at the hyperscalers and find a little area that they're not servicing particularly well because it's just maybe a bit of a distraction for them, and start a business honing in on those. because there are millions of businesses built off the back of these hyperscalers, and some of them are obviously enormous now, multi-billion-dollar businesses. So yeah, we latched onto them. We believed in what they were doing, and we believed that what they were going to provide was going to solve a lot of problems for our customers. And it wasn't a bet, it wasn't a gamble. It was just a matter of when that would happen. And once again, if you're maybe a slightly risk-averse entrepreneur, taking a bet on something or you're just waiting on when is going to happen is way better than hoping that what you've decided to build is going to actually work. So we just knew that people would want their data. They'd want to get away from tape. And so far, that's been the case.
Mm-hmm. When you talk about identifying little niches, so to speak, around use cases of these hyperscalers, are there particular data points or insights that you should be looking for in order to at least be going, there may be a possibility here?
I probably have a slightly narrow view of that because I'm looking for things in my particular area. I think it's a combination of pain points for customers that you can hear from them that aren't solved by what the hyperscalers have done. I guess a good analogy is a lot of people realize the benefit of using servers in AWS as opposed to having them on-prem. But AWS didn't have anywhere near enough people to go to that business and help them migrate that server from their on-prem place into the cloud. So what you saw there was just about every IT shop on the planet became experts in migrating servers. Now that's not one of the little niche areas that I'm talking about. But then within that, there's about 15 niche areas of security, how to do it without any downtime, how to do replication across clouds. So there's all these little niches that spring up from that. It's almost like a mind map where you type in server migration and you get 15 other things that you haven't thought of. And each one of those is a little nugget. And it's not hard to poke around and find out who's involved in those and then make a decision about whether you want to specialize in that. Yeah, little hard to say. My customers' red flags were during COVID, the streaming services were realizing unprecedented viewerships because there were a lot of people at home. And if I wanted to watch an old Seinfeld episode, it just wasn't online. And I thought, why are these broadcasters not getting their content up there and monetizing stuff that's 20 years old? And sure enough, probably the top 5 jobs we've done, aside from the Met work in the UK, have been large broadcasters getting their content into a position where they could monetize it. So it was just a little bit of a sign of, hey, what's the world doing? What's the technology available to make that happen? And where do I find a spot to nestle in?
Commercial considerations. I know you've touched upon this, especially with the Nexus, when it comes to companies reviewing or thinking about moving legacy data to the cloud. Are there any other considerations that companies should be aware of as they consider this move?
Thinking from the entrepreneur side about developing new technology to sell to large corporates, one of the things that I have found is that because technology is changing so fast, sometimes what you want to sell is almost a proof of concept or an idea about how the future might look. Procurement teams are not set up at large enterprises like Coca-Cola or BHP or Rio Tinto to buy things that don't have an end result. They're just not geared at that. They have a line item that says, what are you going to deliver and when is it going to be due? And the reality is that AI is not something where there's almost even a finish line where you say, I've delivered it, you want to sign off. Because once you get into it, you realize there's new products that you can derive out of there, and there's different angles that the company may want to take with it. So one of the things I found is that the procurement teams at the large corporates are just not prepared for some of the types of procurement that those large businesses really need to embark on. They need to understand how to leverage AI in their logistics and supply chains. But when you bring in a Palantir to help you do that, they've mastered the ability to actually come to the table with an outcome in mind. But there's a lot of smaller players who are really just experimenting. And yeah, anyway, procurement of an experiment is not normally something the big boys like to do. They like to know that they're going to get a result. So I have found that the large guys are just not ready for some of this tech. And you have to find a way to pitch it in such a way that there is a final result, almost a series of pit stops where there's milestones that you get paid for in order to keep the experiment moving. From a pure tape arc side in terms of the commercial considerations that companies need to undertake to move to the cloud, that's a different issue. There's probably 5 key things they need to look at. Number one, how long do I need to keep this data? And what does the forward looking procurement of IT infrastructure look like to maintain access to that content? So if I recorded tapes today and I had a 10-year retention policy, I would need to think that how am I going to access this in 10 years? Will the equipment I bought today still work? If not, let's assume you're going to upgrade that every 3 years, like most IT cycles are. So now you've got 3 acquisitions of hardware in the future. You have the management of those systems, you have the licensing of the software, you have the support and maintenance, you have the data center footprint, and then you have a person who has to understand how to run all of that. And with the cloud, you don't have any of those. They just disappear. The cloud is an evergreen solution. So you put data in the cloud, you don't have to worry about whether you can still access the tape because there's no more tape. And you're paying the cloud a fee to manage it and make it accessible at all times. So you overcome quite a list of costs that pile up that you could easily get rid of. So I think they have to think maybe slightly further than they have in the past. Maybe it was a 3-year procurement thing, but when they look at their retention dates and go 100 years for a court case with a homicide, how am I going to keep this for 100 years? It's pretty clear you're not going to upgrade your tape drives 26 times over 100 years for which would cost you millions, and you could put that same data in the cloud and pay a fraction of that. For our customers, combination of looking at the future, looking at the past, and then deciding whether this is a monetizable data set, which you'll never make money on when it's sitting on tape. You can't access it. You don't even know what you have. You can't share it with anybody. And if it's monetizable, there's your decision. Let's get it in there and let's learn something new from it. Let's get it into a marketplace. Remember, we can share the information that we have with third parties who want to license it. Yeah, it's probably C-level, CTO, CIO thinking around what they want to do with their overall content and how do they meet their guidelines, and then get the IT team to action it.
That's interesting. And as you were talking, I couldn't help but think, is there perhaps the need for almost a business intelligence tool to extract some of the key data points from the data that is on tape? Because I would imagine that in a lot of cases, people aren't really sure as to what's on there, and to make a number of queries in order to, one, discover what's on there that could be usable and feed future scenario planning, so to speak,
Yeah.
would be an interesting proposition. I don't know if that's a reality at the moment, or is there a space for that?
No, absolutely a reality. It's one of the biggest, I don't want to call it a misconception, but there's a big brain block with a lot of companies who go, we don't know what's on those tapes. So let's just read 10 of them, process that data, then we'll read the next 10 and we'll just iterate through. We don't want to have a bunch of data in the cloud that we're paying money for no reason. That is, in my view, the opposite of thinking at scale. So what you want to do is get it all up there and go, oh, we've got 27 million of the same Word document that everybody had as a Word template in their OS. Let's just keep one. Let's get rid of that. You can't do that when you're doing 1 or 2 at a time or 10 at a time or 100 at a time. In addition to that, you just don't see the trends, the longitudinal availability of content in there. And when I say longitudinal, data that may go back 50 years, the price of snow peas at your local supermarket, I'm sure that's in a database within the supermarket's databases. And you take that and you compare it to weather conditions in South America, and you have a look at the cost of fuel, and you can predict the cost of snow peas moving forward based on weather and fuel prices. And people have to start to then think laterally about how we're going to use this content. Who else would want to know about the cost of snow peas? Would they be willing to buy that data? But if you do it piecemeal, A, you're not taking advantage of scale, and B, you're going to miss a whole bunch of, I'll call them street signs that say, go here, go there. You're just going to miss those. And we believe that any data reconciliation that you can do on the ground should be eliminated, and that should be moved to the cloud. and done at scale so that you can do it quickly and you can see the whole problem for what it is as opposed to little pieces of the problem. Almost goes back to the very beginning of the company I had where we were feeding these little pieces of data to the oil company when they were looking for the one object that was of interest instead of putting it all up there and honing in straight into that. A lot of wasted time and energy.
Brilliant. I think we should just touch upon managing risks for certain people. It's a question that would probably come up. How are you addressing this issue of risk associated with data migration projects?
When people look at their historical data that's on tape, they come up with a half a dozen key risks that pop into mind. Number one, will I be able to read the tape? Is it deteriorating? Is there going to be a problem with it? I've stored it in a air conditioned room for the last 14 years. And if I need it, will I be able to get the data back? So that's the first one, tape deterioration. People wonder whether that's a major issue. The second thing is, do I have the equipment to read it? So, hey, let's pull that 14-year-old tape back into the office and we'll read our historical email off of it that we need, only to find out that they don't have the tape drive that created it anymore. Who would? Who keeps 14-year-old pieces of IT equipment in their office? Funnily enough, a lot of people do at the moment just to read their tapes. So that's risk number two. A, is the tape deteriorating? B, do we have the equipment to even read it? C is then that data was written with a piece of software. What software wrote it? Because it's probably encapsulated in a format that they don't have access to because they probably don't have a license to 14-year-old software once again. So that's number three. These are risks these are risks that people look at when they're just looking at their tape collection. Last one, is it protected? If there was a fire at my storage facility, would that be the only copy that I have? And the answer is yes. We better do something about that. So when you get to the one last thing is there's a big selling point that the tape industry has. They call it the Airgap. And they go, your data will never be anywhere near as secure as it is when it's on a tape with an air gap where nothing can touch it. Your computer can't touch it. No hacker can get in there. Me personally, I think that's a load of crap. And yes, it's a great solution if you never want to access your data again, but who keeps it if they never want to access it? So the question then becomes, what's the cloud equivalent of the air gap? And funnily enough, the cloud has an air gap solution where you can eject your data from the online system. They also spend billions and billions of dollars on their security infrastructure every year. And you record a tape in your data center on a Thursday, and your courier driver shows up to take it back to the warehouse to put it in secure storage. How do you know that courier driver didn't drive off with your tape and take it home, plug it into his tape drive, and read your network? It seems crazy that you'd almost hand over your entire network to a strange courier driver, but you wouldn't put it behind your own security infrastructure in the cloud that has $1 billion of security management layered over the top of it. Those are some of the arguments that we come up with is, A, deterioration's real. B, your gear is going to go out of date and you'll have to upgrade it. There's every chance that when you upgrade your tape equipment that it will be incompatible with your old tape. It just won't be backwards compatible. So it'd be like trying to stick a VHS tape into a DVD player. It's just not going to happen. So a lot of considerations conspiring. Tape still has a place. I do believe that. There's a lot of use cases being missed out at the moment because people are still thinking old school about tape being the only place that they could put this content. I don't subscribe to that.
Right. With Tape Ark itself, I'm curious. You're obviously on the cutting edge, if I can put it that way, in terms of data migration from tape to cloud. But I'd be curious as to how you're fostering a culture of innovation and scalability within your own team.
It's a very strange business to be in the cutting edge of something that relates to extreme historical problems. It's almost two ends of the spectrum. And the other interesting thing about it is I do have some older developers that experienced tape and the frustration with it. And they're getting a lot of passion. They're using a lot of passion to help people out of that problem. So they enjoy that. Then there's a younger crew of developers that we have here that had never seen a tape, just never saw one in a data center, never really realized that they were such a big part of the ecosystem. And I think they're getting a lot of kicks out of talking old compute languages like SCSI and being able to connect to an old tape drive and make it do things, running a piece of equipment. It's almost like rather than being able to program a modern robot dog to go do something in the data center, they're actually trying to make a 25-year-old device do things that it wasn't designed to do. And they seem to really get a kick out of that. But really, the best thing that we have is the storytelling around what a customer was able to do when we finished our job with them. The fact that we will be supplying data to potentially help cure cancer, that we will be looking at things like mesothelioma in lung disease issues based on the chest x-rays, potential job in North America for something like 180,000 MRIs that could then be used in machine learning to look at all kinds of organ malformations. And just they love that. They love those stories. They love that they're having an impact even in a small way. And that totally motivates the team. And plus, a lot of them log into their streaming service at night and they're watching content that we helped put there. So they get a kick out of being able to tell their family that this episode is brought to you by Tape Ark from Netflix.
So with the storytelling piece, how is it shared within the organization? Is it you or project managers highlighting the final use case once a project is completed, or is there another process to it altogether?
So in our regular staff meetings that we have every month, I do highlight the results that a customer received. We do a lot of surveys with customers. So every customer does a survey. It's not just a net promoter score, but it also asks some questions about how they could use the content. And this Friday, I'm actually running a 2-hour storytelling meeting where we're going to take the very first jobs that we ever did and review the motivation behind the customer and myself for wanting to tackle them, and then have just a look back at maybe what they might have been able to achieve as a result. And a job we did 4 years ago, we thought was really cool back then, but now they've been able to use that content for things that weren't even around 4 years ago to make new discoveries from things we hadn't thought of. So yeah, we're having a storytelling session this Friday with the senior team and marketing in particular, so they can get some messaging out of the sort of messaging we want to make sure our customers hear. Plus, I'm super passionate about it, so it probably rubs off a little bit.
Brilliant. In this area of data migration from tape to cloud and hyperscale partnerships, do you find this perhaps an aspect or two that doesn't get talked about very much? If so, what would they be?
Our relationships with our hyperscale partners are absolutely key to our success. They really want to help small companies grow, particularly if those companies are going to contribute to their own ecosystems of growth. If you work super hard on those relationships, you will eventually gain different competencies and status within those groups where their teams refer to you when they need something done. So one of our developers here works on AWS's storage gateway product. They use him as a tester. He's probably the world authority in someone else's technology because we've spent so much time playing with it and testing it, making sure it'll do what we need it to do. And because we work at scale, we're also doing things that these systems are really getting tested with. We're throwing some super large scale data sets at these things to try and break them. For me, forming those relationships has helped us with customer referrals. It's helped us with case studies. It's helped us with promotion of the company where they've recorded a video about what we're doing to put on their own website, and that goes out to 15 million people. They bring you into conferences where they need your specialist knowledge. I can't say enough about making sure that you work as closely as you can with these guys to gain maximum benefit, which includes funding, helping you get projects off the ground, POC funding, marketing development funds to help you get some advertising up, website contributions, credits for customers who want to try something in the cloud but don't really know whether it's going to work and they need to be convinced. So the clouds will offer you some credits to help that customer over the line. Super beneficial partnerships. Couldn't have been where we are now without them.
And I'm curious, how are you actually nurturing these relationships beyond, of course, the actual usage and testing of the products and things of that nature? I wonder if you could speak more from a human to human perspective.
A couple things. We have regular meetings face to face with our local partnership manager. We appointed a partnership manager internally. So Emma Jenkins, is just dedicated to fostering the relationship between our partners and ourselves, to keep them informed on what we're doing, to make sure that we take full advantage of what they're offering. And we produce a regular newsletter that just goes to our partners. So even though the audience might only be a few hundred, we're informing them about great things that we've done that reflect well on their platform, And then their salespeople share that with their other sales partners and go, hey, look what happened here. Does that customer have that problem? You should speak to Tape Ark about trying to get that done. So it's a combination of face-to-face, regular attendance at events, sharing their content on social media and getting some feedback from them. And then they start to share yours, which gets you far greater reach than you would organically. And our partnership manager, who's been instrumental in just keeping them informed and making sure we get the benefits that we can out of the relationship. Yeah, that's the keys for us, is a bit of face-to-face and a bit of social.
Mm-hmm. Brilliant. Just to wrap up, if you were listening to this episode, what would you say would be your top takeaway?
Think at scale, bite off more than you can chew and then chew like hell. And look for little acorns that you can create an oak tree out of. They're scattered all over the place. They're often overlooked by the big guys, but if you want to start a multi-million-dollar company, there are plenty of those nuggets lying around. I've got about 20 of them right now that I would love to do, but my wife would kill me. I'm just going to stick to this.
This has been a fascinating conversation. If listeners are curious, want to find out more, or connect with you, where would you recommend they head to?
You can go to www.tapeark.com, or you can go to Guy C. Holmes on LinkedIn and throw me a message. I'd be happy to have a chat with you, either whether you're a customer who might need some assistance or whether you're an entrepreneur working in a kind of an obscure space where you might want some advice. I'm more than happy to have a chat.
Sure. We'll include links to those in the show notes. Guy, this has been a blast. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Nice to see you again.
Likewise.